Welcome to the Leadership Surgery, where we operate on your biggest leadership challenges. You share your pain points anonymously if you prefer, and our surgeons will diagnose and dissect before offering recommended treatment. Scrubbing in, we have Anthony Taylor. Good afternoon, my friend.
Good afternoon, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, and yourself?
Yeah, good. Just back from a week off, so fantastic.
Excellent. Welcome back. Welcome back to the rat race. Quick, would you rather for you? Would you rather have a pause button or a rewind button for your life?
Oh, the rewind. Given I put my foot in it on more than one occasion, I'm actually going to go for pause.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go for pause because I think rewind, if you keep trying to scrub everything out, part of who I am today is because of things I've done in the past. So actually learning to pause before one reacts rather than responding might be better. So
very
pause.
Nice. Very
Does
deep.
the pause button also pause aging?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll have that one, please.
I mean, I haven't got a patent on this pause button, so I can't tell you everything it does or does not do. But, okay, great. Sally Bryce, good afternoon, Sally.
Hello.
Great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm really good. Yeah, sun is shining as I can see out the window, so all good.
Excellent. Would you rather have a 60-second conversation with your past self or your future self?
Definitely my past self.
Okay.
And I would sit down and say something along the lines of, Sally, how many times do you need to know that he's not right for you? Yeah. We've gone back 3 times now. How much more do you need to have to experience and know a lesson? So yeah, definitely 60 seconds with my past self. Move on, lady. Move on.
I feel like there's another podcast episode there.
Absolutely.
You give me a bottle of wine and I could definitely tell you about that situation.
Wonderful. And good afternoon, Dan Finn.
Hello. How are you?
Great to see you. I'm well. Good to see you. Quick, would you rather for yourself? Would you rather have all traffic lights you approach turn green or never have to stand in line again?
Oh, great question. Never stand in line.
So the queuing, you're cutting the
deal
queuing.
with traffics, yeah. Because the time that I'd save not queuing would negate the traffic lights turning red, like they do with water. Yeah, never queuing again. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I was at a gig on Friday night, and there was a massive queue for the bar and massive queue for the food, and I'd just be able to waltz in. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that is pretty good.
No NHS waiting times. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Again,
right. Okay.
The conversation could go on.
I'm just going to put a disclaimer out there for anyone listening. This is not real. This does not exist. It's not a power I possess, or do I have authority to introduce it? I'm sorry. I'm just gonna say, with Anthony's pause or rewind, I'd go for pause too. I think that would be smart. I think the rewind button, I'm like you, Ant, big believer in the learn from the past experiences. Sally, I'm going with 60-second conversation with my past self. I don't like the idea of meddling with the future, even though everything that we do now is effectively setting up said future. And then with the traffic lights and the queuing, I'm with you again, Dan. I'd rather get rid of the queuing. The traffic lights are just, I don't know, it's something more acceptable. That's just part of driving, right? It's a part of being on the road in some way. But if you could get rid of queuing, oh yeah, I would love that. Even if it does go against everything British to queue.
It is innate to us, isn't it? As British,
it is.
Form a queue.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear from our patient then for today. Hi everyone. I'm Becky. I run quite a fast-growing small business and I love it. I'm passionate about developing people, but often find myself unsure where to step in. One of my team members, Leo, not their real name, is talented but takes a few liberties. They cut corners. They resist feedback, but they are influential with others. I wonder whether I've let too much slide when I was just trying to build trust. I'm also concerned about unintentionally shaping people into versions of myself. How can I develop my team while keeping culture, standards, healthy boundaries intact? Your help is appreciated. Thank you, Becky. Not Becky's real name. Thank you very much, Becky, for this. Okay. Some tasty things in here, some great things to sink our teeth into. Symptoms. what are we noticing here? What are we highlighting as being the initial problem, pain points, and what's springing to mind for you?
Well, I think starting on a positive note, Becky's talked about she runs a fast growing small business. And I think it's always easier to nip these things in the bud when you've got a small business rather than when it becomes bigger. You get that cultural drift that happens when organizations start to grow. So I think on the plus side for her, she's definitely the fact there's still a small business. But yeah, there's certainly some other symptoms in there. I think some symptoms are things we've talked about in past episodes as well, but I'm keen to see what the others have got.
Yeah, I often use that analogy of with a smaller business, or even when you focus on just an individual team within an organization, changing culture, the way you do things, can be like spinning a jet ski. You can turn it really quickly. But the bigger that is, the broader that is, the more it becomes like turning an ocean liner. It's going to take lots of time. And in that time, your resolve gets tested a lot of how committed you are to that change. Dan, what about you? What are you highlighting here?
I think one of the things that springs out to me is this influencing others bit. Now, is that in a good way or a bad way? Do we think that this person is doing this? So, because Becky calls out that they're very talented, but they're taking a few liberties. Now, what's that? What's their influence doing for the rest of the team? Is it that actually I'm influencing them to kind of follow the same sort of talents and skills that they've got, and they're kind of bringing them up that way? But are they also then providing this culture of it's okay if I do that? I can take some liberties because I perform at this level as well. So, it'd be really interesting to think what level of influence does that person actually have? If it's just the negative, then we're on a real slippery slope. But if it's if it's some of the positive as well, probably makes the conversation that Becky needs to have with them even more difficult, because the person's, is it Leo? Is it, sorry, Leo says, might say, yeah, but I'm performing and I'm doing this, so cut me some slack. I can imagine that's the kind of conversation that could or may happen.
Yeah, my mind is immediately going to, if there's influence there, then when it comes to that level of influence, I mean, that can just keep growing, right? A person's influence could just keep growing. And so there's no guarantee that the influence is always just positive. So it mentions, Becky says that Leo cuts corners and Leo resists feedback. Then that is going to pass on. And so, it's rubbing off on someone else, isn't it? That is going to be picked up as well, which makes it very, very tricky. Sal, what are you thinking?
Well, look, I think you've made some great points already. I think building on what you said, I'm assuming, and it might be an assumption here, but because it's a small business and it's Becky's, she's had a hand in everybody's recruitment. So
yes.
You'd like to think she's not inheriting Leo. She made the choice to employ him, and there must be things around his skill set that she that she wanted and that she liked. And I suppose quote that springs to mind: I'd rather rein in a racehorse than whip a donkey. And that's
a great quote. I've never
it's not mine, it's someone else's, but because she must have hired him, she must have seen some raw talent. And it sounds like, and again, this is so difficult when you don't know all the facts, isn't it? But, I've seen people like Leo, they kind of go head first into things. They want to get stuff done. They've got great energy. They've got great ideas. But sometimes they haven't got that. You talked about that pause button, Anthony, in the intro. They maybe haven't got that ability yet to maybe understand how they're coming across. Maybe they're not as kind of familiar with feedback, so they're a little bit kind of spiky if they get any. And I've just got this picture in my hand that Leo's quite young, but I don't know why that is, but that's just what it's made me think about. So I think, if Becky's had a hand up, there must be things in there. So to your point, all of this is very manageable because she's seen in these individuals that work for her things that she's wanted.
Yeah. And so do you think it's appropriate then, and I know we're kind of delving into the treatment here, but is it appropriate then to revisit those things in conversation with said individual? Not as black and white as this necessarily, but I hired you for this, and that's what I want to see. I did not hire you for that, and therefore I do not want to see. Is that what you're thinking, Sal?
Yeah, and again, I won't, jump into solutions, but what was going through my head is like, do you have, this is my corporate background. We're really au fait with the fact that we have regular one-to-ones, and prevention is always better than cure, isn't it? So, how do you like to have feedback, or what works for you? I'd probably, with a new member of staff, be having some of those conversations early doors to prevent some of this stuff. So, I was wondering, does Becky do that? Does she hire these people, and then a small business, you're really busy, some of that rigor we may be experienced in the corporate world isn't there, and that's where maybe some of these things are slipping, or she's not getting the traction, or people aren't aware of their boundaries because some of that good practice that we know works isn't being deployed here. And it is harder when you've got a small business. And would you agree?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And it's funny. I had a conversation with a potential client only about 6 weeks ago. They're a recruitment business, and there'd been a change at the top because of bad practice, some underhand shenanigans, one thing or another, and they got rid of the senior team. And this not new guy, he'd been there for a while, was sort of promoted up to running it. But there were 2 or 3 really high performers that sounded a bit like the Leos. They were bringing in the bulk of the sales, but they were engaging in some poor behaviors. And he wanted to address it, but then when we came to looking at it, didn't want to address it enough, because it was still kind of, oh, they're still my star performers.
Yeah.
And if I pull them in, what's it going to mean for my numbers? And the bosses are looking at my numbers. And the temptation is that numbers always win in the short term.
Yeah.
But culture in the long term. And we had this conversation, and he just wasn't at the point where he's ready to do anything about it. I said, well, look, when it gets bad enough, come back.
Yeah.
But
And I think
with it before then.
And I think that phrase you just mentioned, And, is really key about he didn't want it enough.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really important when it comes to culture. Every team culture, organization culture, individual values, even at some point in life, they get tested, don't they? They get put under the microscope. How much are you, how committed to these things are you? And when they're in that stage, you either break or you persevere. And to some extent, it's probably healthy that individual you just talked about there, Ant, has recognised, I know it's important, but it's not important enough to me at the moment. Okay, well, that's your bed. You've got to lie in it. Whether that proves to be right or wrong, we'll see further down the line. But at least acknowledging it is maybe the first part of the battle. Sorry, Dan, you were going to come in.
No, absolutely. It's to that point of how much, to Sally's analogy of how much does Becky want to rein in this horse, and what is the detriment of that? But there's also the other side. If letting him gallop free, what's the impact on the rest of the team and the culture, to your point? Because if I'm in that team and I'm seeing, Leo does a really good job, but he's getting away with murder, well, I'm showing a bit of favoritism to his side. And as we said, it's such a small organization, small business. You're going to see that. So me being employed in that same business, am I thinking, well, there's definitely favoritism for one, and two, well, I can get away with that as well then.
Yeah.
So I think for Becky, there's got to be this. Well, what's my non-negotiables with Leo? What are the things that I can let that slide because they do this, or I can let that slide because actually it doesn't really impact the culture that much, or it doesn't have such a negative effect on the rest of the team. But there's some things which that they are my non-negotiables, and I'm not letting that slide. And for me, one of them is not taking feedback. Like I'm a huge believer in you need feedback to grow and to develop and to also build the business. And if Becky's running her own business, that she'll know that. So I think that would be one of the non-negotiables. But I think she's got to find this cut-off point of what she can let slide and what she can't.
Yeah.
It's just such a shame, listening to some of you speak there, that people are willing to let things almost get really bad before they're willing to tackle them. Because we all know, don't we, with any situation, if you let it go, it's so much harder to undo. And the beauty that Becky's got in a small operation, and look, it is a balancing act, because I'm a small business of one, and I know how hard it is to kind of create time when you're busy trying to make money, and pay the bills. stopping everything and having a half-day meeting or getting everyone together can feel like a real luxury.
Yeah.
But you have to remind yourself, if I don't take this time now, or, I don't create these opportunities to have these conversations, it is going to cost me, whether it's going to cost me in terms of losing great people or losing the customer or things not being done to the right standard, because again, maybe expectations haven't been set clearly enough early doors. This stuff is going to bite me on the bottom at some point. So why would I wait for it to get really bad for it to happen? Because I'm currently working with an organization where I've been asked to come and do some work around their teams. And it's got really bad. I'm going to have to wear my tin hat when I go in. But I just think, God, there could have been so many things that, we can get into this when we talk a little bit about the solutions, but there's so many things that you can do gently that will really help. They don't, because some people worry these going to be really difficult conversations. And a lot of the time, if you're doing it early enough, they don't have to be at all. They can be quite collaborative. They can be quite open. They can be quite fun. They can be part of, like I say, your one-to-ones, your language. So you're doing things before something, bad happens. So yeah, I suppose that's a shame to hear.
Well, let's just stick on that train of thought for a minute, because normally we'd start talking about recommended treatment, but we're kind of venturing into the preventative first. What do you think, if then anybody's listening thinking, I don't want to end up down that road, I don't want to be where the situation that Becky's in, whether they're a small business owner, whether they're a leader of a team in an organization, they're very conscious of that's not what they want to see or experience. What do we think we need to do to prevent that from happening? And what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to go build on Sal's metaphor about animals, and I think in this scenario, Leo, is a bit like a puppy. So if he doesn't, if you're training a puppy, you're going to have to keep rewarding it for the behavior you want to see, and telling it off in the moment for the behavior you don't want to see. And it's about course correction, short and often and quickly. Otherwise, Leo is going to shit all over everything like a puppy will. So he will, because he'll keep running off when you'll be all cute and doing everything else. But actually, if you don't bring him back, that's great, well done for that. But no, you got to do this. That's great for this, but come and do that. So I think it's to go to how to stop it. Frequent feedback, positive and constructive, is the key.
Yeah. Sal?
Well, I was, and I, perfect. And I think if you are bringing people on board, and like I say, you can put some kind of, catch up in. And yes, as part of those conversations, you might talk about the task and something that Leo or other members of the team are working on, but also have an upfront conversation about how people like feedback. I'd say to Leo, if it was one of our first conversations, if you're slipping or off track, what would you like me to say? How would you like me to approach it? If something's going really well, how would you like me to approach it? Because also some people like recognition in front of others. Some people would die and, prefer it in private. So just knowing those nuances, that Sally versus, Leo versus Paul versus Dan is all different. You asking that will help you to kind of, when you said, like, if it's slipping, we've got a situation, can I have a conversation with you about it? You've almost given yourself permission and a language and a way to talk about it. Yeah. So I think, make it as part of your one-to-ones and talk about it up front.
Yeah, I think I definitely come back to what many of us would think is fundamentals of establishing those regular one-to-ones and regular team get-togethers. I think that's really critical. And if those are in place, even if things, and maybe Becky's got them in place already, maybe things have got a bit out of hand or getting away from it a little bit, those are the kind of environments where you can have those meaningful conversations and you can start to bring things back. You can start to turn the jet ski, as it were, back in the direction that you need it to be. And if those things are not in place, then anyone listening in that sort of situation, I'd be saying, well, you need to do that. You need to put those things in place because they help you to course correct and steer the ship, as it were. I'm going very nautical today. Over the period of time that you are, you're leading this business. That is how you steer, isn't it? In those one-to-ones, in those team get-togethers, you can get that course alignment, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it goes to setting the upfront expectations right from the get-go. How are we going to behave? What are we trying to achieve? why are we doing what we're doing? What are we trying to achieve? And what are our behaviors? What are our non-negotiables, the good and the bad? And then help people, if those aren't agreed up front, then it's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
I've got to build on that, Ant. A model called COASTAR. So it's spelled COASTAR. And just if I take a couple of minutes to remind myself, because I use it a lot, and I think this gets stuff out of people's heads and make sure we're on the same page. Well, it's a framework. It doesn't mean that it's about empowering somebody rather than telling them explicitly what to do. So the C stands for context. If I was working with you, Ant, I'd talk about, why am I asking you to do this piece of work? Why is it important? So you understand the broader picture. The objectives piece then is about, what does good look like? Because my version of what good looks like versus your version of what good looks like might be different. So I think getting that out and being really clear. So we've covered the context. We know the objectives. The activities come next, and that's a bit about if our objectives are kind of out in the future, what are the activities that we think will help us to get to that point? S stands for support. So it might be, Ant, look, you're new to the business. I need to introduce you to certain customers, or I need to give you access to certain files, or what do you need from me, as your manager from a support point of view? And then we talk about timelines. So it might be that we agree something that doesn't need to be delivered till the end of Q2. Fine.
Yeah.
And then there's agreement and review. The review is if it's end of Q2, what are the reviews that need to happen before that? Because you don't want to just wait till the end of the Q2 to actually get together. The really important part, though, is the agreement. Because if we've had a really good conversation, and we've talked through the context, the objectives, the support, the timelines, if I just say as a leader, are you okay with that, Ant? What do you typically tend to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. A better way to do it, I've found, is to say, Ant, we've just talked that through. Just summarize back to me. Talk to me about what you've understood. Because in repeating back, people will either go, okay, Sal, you talked about this is the context. I know this is what I've got to do. And you think, great. Their body language, their whole energy, you feel convinced that they're able to do it. They've got it. If they start going, so I think who was it you said I need to speak to? You can then, look, you sound a bit unsure. Let's talk about it again. So the COASTAR model it's a really nice framework. It's really simple, but it enables that empowerment. But I feel safe as the leader because I know you've got it. And you feel safe as the individual because you've had time with me and you understand what's involved. And I think that's a really good way to set expectations.
Yeah.
I think that's great because actually the other part of what Becky came to us with, and I think Leo's been stealing the show from what we've talked about, is actually she talks about, I made some notes about actually, is she unintentionally shaping people into mini versions of herself?
Yeah.
She talked a little bit about some of that learned helplessness I think you mentioned before, but to Sal's point then about actually what I liked you did about agreement, which was, so what have you heard, what do you understand, taking that coaching approach. And I think that's something that she might want to think about so that she doesn't create lots of mini Beckys running around, because that will impact the business as well, because if it's just replicating her, well, they can only grow so much.
So recommended treatment then for Becky here and now. This is the situation she's in. She's highlighted a few things that we've touched on around. I mean, she says she's passionate about developing people. She's made awareness of Leo, and as we've said, we've talked a bit about that situation. But also, there's this thing of developing others, but not into clones of herself. How can I develop my team while keeping culture, standards, healthy boundaries intact? Dan, what do you think?
I think first thing I would do is all of her team and reset and say, almost do COASTAR with all of the team to talk about this is what we're after, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is when we want to achieve it. Is everybody in agreement? And you can talk about their cultural values within that piece. So I would start with that. So not speaking to Leo in isolation to start with, but we're talking about a reset. I would then have a one-to-one conversation with Leo, talking about, we're doing a reset. This is where we're going. This is what we want to achieve now. The way you've been acting or the way you've been approaching things in the past isn't quite what we want. So here are all the good things that you do well. Here are some of the things that I'd like to change as well, and these are the reasons why. I think for me, those two things need to happen straight away.
The only slight amendment I'd make to that, Dan, is rather than this isn't what we want, I would be saying this isn't what I want.
Okay,
It's my business, without getting too egotistical. But Becky, put your stamp on things.
Yeah.
And just say this is the culture that you want to establish. So make that really, really clear. I also think there can be a misinterpretation of we want, as in an individual can think, we've all been talking about you, and here's what we'd like you to know, rather than this is applicable to every individual. But yeah, I completely agree. I really like that. Sal?
I'll get to the point that was going through my head in a second. So my thing would be around the COASTAR, because I think you've got there a framework, some scaffolding almost to kind of frame the conversation, but it still leaves space for people to come up with the ideas of what they want to do to get to that end outcome. And I suppose Becky needs to be comfortable, because I find this hard myself, when it's your business and it feels like yours, is to give people freedom. If we both agree that's the end outcome, give Leo or whoever it might be in the team space to get there. And they might get to the end outcome differently to you, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. And that's something I've had to feel really comfortable with, that people will get to the same outcome, but through different kind of methods and ways. So use that to help you feel safer to let go, and the person to feel safe to have that space to do it. The second thing that's going through my mind is maybe we come back to this episode again, because I think there's other bits that we haven't unpicked around development and culture that we could probably dig into a bit further. But those would be, at the point of the conversation we're at now, that would be my kind of sum up on the things that might help.
Yeah. I think for me, it's the cultural thing is what's really jumping out. And that's the bit that I'd really want to just encourage Becky or anyone else in a similar situation. For me, when I think about culture, it's about if I'm establishing a culture within my team, for example, or my business, it's about what I promote and what I permit. So the promote being the stuff that I want to encourage, that I celebrate. When somebody does something that I think is fantastic, both privately and publicly, I will let people know that's really good, i.e. that's what I want to see more of. And similarly, if there's things that I don't want to see or don't like to see, then, I wouldn't necessarily name and shame publicly, but I would let the individual know that that's not the way that I want things to occur. So I'm saying I will not permit that, but this is the stuff that I want to promote. So when you think about, Becky mentions about culture and standards, I think standards are not what you expect from people, they are what you accept from people. So rather than it being about this is what you've got to do, it is about what you allow and what you say yes to and give the nod of approval to. And there's a massive difference there that I think is really critical for leaders to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I agree with a lot of those. I don't disagree with anything. That's great. I think I'd also say, in terms of suggesting treatment, I would say to Becky is to be more curious with her people. So set the standards, do everything you talked about there, but where she doesn't want to intentionally shape people into visions of herself, is start asking them more coaching questions. So what do you think you should do? What have you tried? What could you try? And start to draw out from people. So going back to the expectations bit, but she's going to set the standards about, I'm not going to jump in and give you the solution. I'm going to start drawing out of you, and I want you to start thinking for yourselves a bit more. So I'd do everything you've talked about there and add that little bit in as well.
Great. I think we should stitch up there. Well, I think we kind of have stitched up, haven't we, there? We've kind of given that recommended treatment towards the end, saying this is what needs to happen. Becky, I hope that's been particularly useful to you. I think some great things share. And Sal, as you've mentioned, maybe we should actually come back to this and look a little bit more about the developing others angle, because that's slightly, we haven't covered that as much, and I think there's more to say on that. Great. Well, please do like and subscribe. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell your friends about the podcast. We'd love to gain more followers, viewers, and points of view. So if you've got anything you'd like to share with us, whether that's a pain point that you'd like us to address, or if you just like some commentary that you'd like to feed back on, email us, theleadershipsurgery@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. But thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll speak again soon.